it always feels like a waste when they make one movie for $200 million when that's like 3 billion rand. We could make 100 South African movies.
Critical analysis is like a thing that's like studied, you know, like how to give good criticism is like a thing that can be learned. And you can tell the difference between someone who gives real good critical analysis versus, I don't know, someone who says that they like or dislike it.
But I do believe that there is a much bigger gate for filmmakers now with long form, and I think that's why you said so many of like filmmakers have migrated. Hey guys, it's Caleb.
And Yaku.
And Mark.
And welcome back to Department Spotlight, where we speak to our friends and colleagues about their experiences in the film industry.
And today we are the friends and the colleagues together. Sorry, no guests.
And in today's episode, we're going through 10 questions that get film lovers arguing as a part of Dummies, you know, the whole filmmaking for dummies, etc. for dummies, you know what I mean? So they've got this article, 10 questions that get film lovers arguing. And we thought, I mean, what better way to get film lovers arguing on a podcast? So, yeah, let's jump into it.
Just a side note, Yaku and Mark might get a bit physical, but, you know, as it happens on the podcast, I'll describe the violence as it goes along.
Question 1. Is cinema dead?
So, yeah, I think for me, I think it was in the 90s where they saw like in the 90s, when like what I think of when they're asking is cinema dead, is like people still going? Is it still making money? Is it still like a thing like that? And I think if you look at how it was in the 90s versus how it is now, in the 90s, like a film would make like 60 million and they would see that as a success. But nowadays, like only like I think it's since like the Spider-Man movies in the 2001s and going more upwards, I think for some reason people think that a film hasn't been successful if it doesn't make like over 200 million or something like that. And so I think in that way, a lot of people thought in the 90s that cinema was going to be dying out because I know the numbers were going down. And all of a sudden we started getting all these big cinema hits that hit the box office and started going up. So I would say cinema is not dead. If anything, we're breaking new records in terms of box office numbers. But in terms of story and in terms of original story and stuff like that, I would say that we are having a drought in terms of what is like, what studios are funding and what's making money back, because what they see as successful is not necessarily the truth about the matter. I don't know if you guys interpret the question in a different way.
So I think yeah, that's a good interpretation. I think it's not that there aren't stories. It's like you say, the studios aren't funding them because there's this obsession with making money back, right? Back then, obviously there's inflation and whatever. So 60 million would have been 200 million now. Maybe. I don't know the exact numbers. But back then as well, they wouldn't spend 200 million on a movie. Whereas now they spend 200 million on a movie. But it's also like fine, spend the 200 million and make your money back. But then they expect that $200 million movie to also make $1 billion. You know? True. So they want a 5x return. So in order to get that, they only fund the mass appeal stuff, meaning that the smaller stuff don't or struggle to get made. Even though, like if you think about it, let's say The Irishman, which cost, 350 million? Or was it 200 million?
What? Such a big budget?
It was a huge budget from Netflix, right? Netflix funds thousands of things, right? And they don't expect, because they don't do theatrical releases that often, they don't expect that one movie to make all that money back. But they expect that movie to attract new subscribers. Now, the problem with the studios is they want to make 5x return, but like it's not like they're going to take that 5x and then put it into other movies that might not do as well. They're going to put that money into more movies that they also expect to make a 5x return. So I think there's an issue with the people who fund the movies and then want to keep the money instead of putting it back into movies.
So in the 90s, there were a lot of middle budget movies, and I feel like there aren't really being invested in anymore by studios. It's either sort of extreme blockbusters or there's like independent cinema. And yeah, I feel like that's a thing that has died. But in general, I don't think cinema has died or will ever die, because I think it's an ever-changing thing.
It's like, I think nothing ever dies. It's just something new comes along, and then there's just like phases to everything. So if you look, they used to like everything, like there was plays, and then when films came out, plays thought and theatre would die, but it just kind of changed. You know what I mean? And then when talking films came out, then those actors thought, no, so the world, like things are going to change. And when TV came out, they thought, okay, no, this is the new top dog. And then streaming came out, and they thought it would kill TV. But none of them actually really died. I think they all just kind of switched gears. But all those art forms remain the same, you know, because it's always going to be...
I mean, I think all of them did, like, suffer a little
Yeah,
bit.
I think they did suffer, but I think they still, like... Because if you look at theatre, it's become more prestigious more than anything now. Like, if you look at... Like, if an actor says, okay, I've been in this, but as soon as they said I've been on Broadway, it kind of gives them more status also as well. So I think it's more about shifting, and things are always going to change. And I think in those transition periods, it can seem scary, and you do think things are going to die. But I think it's just a shift, and I think that's why you're saying middle budget films don't make it anymore. But it's because I think the shift in mindset with studios, like if you look at Blade Runner when it came out, it was like such a big thing, and then the sequel came and it literally lost money because they banged so much.
You're talking about the original Blade Runner.
Because that didn't do
It
well.
didn't do well either.
Did it not?
No, it literally performed like exactly the same way that the sequel
Well, the
did.
studio must have known what they were doing.
Here's my thing, though, right? If you... It's fine, make the 200 million that makes $1 billion. But then you got to consider, like, $200 million is either like one movie or it's like $10-20 million movies. And like $20 million is a lot for a movie. I mean,
I feel like
for me, that's 200 million rand, right? That's 300 million rand if we put it in. And there are no South African movies that get that budget. We get maybe 20 million rand, which is less than $2 million for a big budget movie in this country. So I'm sure there's like unions and what, but it always feels like a waste when they make one movie for $200 million when that's like 3 billion rand. We could make 100 South African movies with that one movie. So it feels like a waste, but you know, at the same time, I don't think those movies would look to that quality if they were made for cheaper. So
I also think like the way things are funded is not because the studios are just pulling things out their thumb. I think it's from the market research of what makes money and what doesn't. So they're obviously going to fund into these other movies, and I think just because like people aren't watching like the middle budget movies, like it's only like A24 and all of those things that will fund those kind of films. So I think it's the studios that specialize in that, like you said, like the independent films where they fund that thing. But I think it's from the bigger studios doing the research and seeing what makes money. And when they do take risks, most of the time in today's day and age, honestly speaking, they usually crash or like they usually bomb out in the box office. And it kind of sucks that the quality of a movie is judged by the box office and not actually the quality of the story. But I think that's the day and age we're living in now, where the box office, people are saying like that is equal to how good the movie is, when it could be the complete opposite. Like the Fast and the Furious franchise makes so much money, but they're not at all the best stories, you know. I think the reason people think like original cinema, if you could say that, or like original stories are dead is because they like to equate it to the box office, but I don't think that's what you should measure it by. But I think that's what's become the norm.
I was thinking about middle budget movies again, and we were talking about Netflix. I think those kinds of movies are on Netflix now. You know, those kind of middle budget movies. So it's adapted and changed. I'd still like to see those kind of middle budget movies in the cinema as well. And sometimes they do happen in the sort of mainstream cinemas, but they're like usually just comedies, and usually the high budget comedies are not really like my speed. But yeah, I think Netflix has taken up that mantle of making those like really good, you know, not super high budget, not like low budget, but like there's amazing movies at all budget levels, but you know what I mean? It feels like for a while there was that kind of gap.
That's long. Yeah. And I think also another genre that also kind of that I've noticed besides the superhero genre and the remakes and all that, that usually I see like they get quite a bit of money back on small budgets, is the horror genre, because a lot of people are also into that market, like where you'll see like it's not really like people say it's horror and stuff, but like movies like Get Out and stuff like that, where they have small budgets and they make so much in return, and Paranormal Activity, Blair Witch Project and all that. I think that's also one of the films where they can have smaller budgets but still get quite a return back on the
All right. So the next question is: has digital cinema destroyed realism? This is a dumb question. No.
Ding, ding, ding. Jaco and Mark, go.
Tell me how it has destroyed realism.
No, I mean, we're having an argument the other day about film and digital, and I thought that you should keep film alive, and Yaku thought we should move on. I don't think digital cinema has killed realism.
I also don't think it's killed it, but I agree with Mark where I do think that you should keep film alive. I think they should have both.
Here's the thing, right? You shoot on film, and Mark sent me this really cool article about how they are preserving a bunch of film reels in a nuclear bunker, right? Cool, preserve it all you want, nobody's going to watch them. What's the point? The film is there to be watched, and now it's just sitting in a nuclear bunker. What?
It's a national, but it's a film registry.
But it's
So they
just
have
like,
to, that's like them keeping it in the registry, and then there's like a list of them. It could be accessed in other means as well.
I mean, just digitize them. Film, for the longest time, was the only way that you could record light and keep it and display it without it like getting ruined or whatever. And like, fine, that was great. It had its time. It did the thing. Now we've got the digital. We store it on hard drives. The hard drives don't break. You can make multiple copies that don't lose any quality. Let's just move on.
But also for me personally, I do not prefer, but I do also just sometimes feel like there's such a different taste to film. Like when we were watching Master of None, and we found out they shot that on film. And I'm not saying it's more realistic, but I just sometimes like how narratives look on it. You know what I mean?
True, but I mean
it's
that was
less
like a
realistic
whole,
for me.
That was a whole like multitude of things. They do the long, single wide shot thing. They don't do any camera movements. They use the lighting techniques. It's not just that fact that it was shot on film. You could recreate that very easily.
But in general, like I think just for certain movies, I just like even like if you look at, I don't know if Mark's going to agree with this because I don't know if he likes the director, but with The Hateful Eight, that was shot on film, wasn't it?
I didn't see any difference. They shot it on the biggest sensor they could, which means that it was just as good as digital. Like there's no film quality at what 65 millimeter.
But I'm not talking about in terms of the quality. I just mean the look. It doesn't look more realistic for me. It actually looks a bit more like dream world, if I can say, in my opinion. That's kind of why I like it, because sometimes the colors seem a bit more warmer, if that makes sense.
I think it's a process, and it's also the tool that you want to use. Like, just because you can replicate it perfectly on digital, I was saying to Yaku that just because there's been, like, for example, people only used to use oil paints to create a painting, but then, things have developed and changed, but people still make oil paintings. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, oil paintings is also cheap and easy to do, whereas film, like movie film, is not cheap and easy to make.
Well, I read at a certain budget level, it becomes negligible.
But I think we do all agree that it does not, answering the question, it does not. So here's a big one, because I think we actually have some friends who are these. But anyway, are film critics still worth reading in today's age? Or what do they mean for film?
I think it depends on the critic. I think there's been a lot of critics these days who just write cool things. Like there's this guy in the Free State I don't know if it's just the Free State. I'm not going to say his name. But he does movie reviews, and my grandmother swears by his movie reviews. If he says it's a good movie, she'll watch it.
Oh, okay, cool.
But the movies that he recommends is so average. Like it's not, and he's not like a film buff. He didn't make movies. He didn't study film. He's just a guy that got a job, and now he's like the expert on movies in the Free State. And it's like, no, these reviews are so average. They don't describe anything, and he never reviews something that he doesn't like. So there's never any like opinions. It's always just like, it's a good movie. It's got this. Go watch it. And it's like, no, it's lame.
I think for me, when I'm thinking about this question, I think like if I'm trying to interpret how they're asking it, like I feel like because of social media today, and because everyone has access to, I sound like such an old man, but because everyone has access to the internet and stuff, everyone has kind of become a film critic, if that makes sense. And like if you look at platforms like Rotten Tomato, where the audience gets to put in their 2 cents, and then you can kind of have this manipulation where people, just because they hate a movie, they get together as a group to try and bring down that movie's score.
Review bomb it.
Yeah, review bomb it, and that's been the case with a lot of films. So I think you have to kind of be picky. I do think critiques have their place, but sometimes they can get it really wrong, because in the past we've seen where critics will literally hate a movie and it becomes a cult classic. So I don't think you can discard them, but I think you can learn a lot from them. But sometimes I think they can be a bit picky when it comes to the filmmaker, especially when they don't know how much hard work went into even a bad film, like there's on all the different levels besides the writer and director. So sometimes I'm not the biggest fan of reading reviews, but I do think they are necessary for someone, if they're genuine, for the director or whoever on the set or the actor to learn if there is a mistake they made. I do think they are necessary in that way.
I think that the art of critical analysis is incredibly important. But I think what a lot of I also sound like I'm an old fuddy-duddy, but sort of couch sort of critics don't realize is that critical analysis is a thing that's studied. How to give good criticism is a thing that can be learned. And you can tell the difference between someone who gives real good critical analysis versus, I don't know, someone who says that they like or dislike it. You know what I mean? I don't care if you like or dislike it. I want to read a piece that by itself is a good, well-written thing as well. It can be about, it doesn't even have to be about a film. You know what I mean? If the write-up about the thing is an engaging piece of writing as well, I think is very important. And that's kind of the thing that's not really focused on anymore, which is kind of a shame.
You know what, though? I think the sort of 21st century way of doing film criticism, which is video essays, is much better than, writing a piece in a newspaper.
A tabloid kind of thing.
Exactly, because people read that still, but the people who do that, they do it as a job, whatever. The people who do it on YouTube are passionate about movies. They talk about things that they liked but also disliked, and what they liked and what they disliked. Exactly like what Mark is saying right now. It's video essays are the old criticism, because if you think about theater reviews, right? I feel like those are still good, because it's not like a variety and the critic gets to choose. He likes this one, so he's going to review this one. It's there's the theater. You go to that theater and whatever showing you watch, and then you'd say, okay, this actor was bad, but the story was good, and this and this and this, and that's a good criticism. And that, I think, because not everybody can just be a theater critic, right? But it seems like anybody can just be a movie critic. Yeah. So I agree.
Do you think then for a filmmaker should either focus more on the critic's opinion or on the general audience, or do you think it's a balance of the two? Or
I think just ignore the critics. Get the people who do video essays, see what they think.
And what do you think about audience responses to things when?
Audience is. Depends on what you're making, but I think if you're not making it for the audience, then.
Because I know a lot of people where they're because they study the film so deep, they look at it more as the anatomy of how they made that movie, and they respect it more, and then sometimes forget about the story or how much it's meant to affect your emotions and stuff like that. If you look at films like Dunkirk or things like that, where critics will talk about how technically brilliant it is, versus where the audience will respond more because they're not used to that. They'll have more of an emotional connection to it. Because if I take myself for an example, before I went to film school, I have different opinions of movies before and after film school. I feel like I become such a snob sometimes, and I don't know if that's a good or bad thing. Should I sometimes just take myself back to that kid that just watches a movie, or what's the approach when it comes to filmmaking? How do you then apply that to yourself? Well,
I really like a film critic called Mark Kermode. He's a British critic. The thing about it, I think, is you're thinking about sort of taking the critic and they're only going to analyze all things as high art, and if it's not high art, then it's terrible. But he has this really good approach where he's able to see critically who the audience is what the film is like playing towards, you know what I mean? And he'll like review it through that lens, you know what I mean? If it's like a sort of a family orientated film or something that's meant to be like just a great like popcorn movie, he's gonna think about it through that lens, you know what I mean? But you get some critics that are like a popcorn movie through like a high art lens, or like vice versa, and it's like, don't do that.
I think that's kind of cool.
That's not what the director was going for. So why are you comparing it to something it's not?
Exactly. I think that critic you're speaking about now, I think that's like, I think the perfect way to kind of do it is kind of see what it's aimed towards. What's the purpose of the movie? It's meant to be a fun time, or what? Because like if you take like you try to get, like you said, try and view Transformers as this higher concept film, you're gonna give it a pretty bad review. But if you see it as a fun thing for kids to go see, it could end up being
like
something
a good
different.
critic, I think, is able to say, I don't think this film is particularly for me specifically, but I'm able to see X, Y, and Z for the audience it's for. You know what I mean? The next one is, do film stars matter anymore?
I think it's important. I think film stars are important at certain budget levels, and also to get funding. Because like if you're a low budget filmmaker and you're trying to get $2 million, which to us is like 30 million rand, that's like our top level budget. People who are going to give you money are going to give you money because of the people who are in your movie, because those people have a reputation for bringing people to the cinemas and getting them money. So I think it's important to get funding, but I don't think it's important. Like, I don't think an actor should be irreplaceable.
I think when it comes to certain well-known actors, when you listen to them in interviews, you find out why they're so big, because of like how well they train and how well they can sing and dance, and they can literally do any, like not any part, but they like, you can see they trained in their craft. And I think there's a reason they are where they are. And I think when you see new people coming in, they slowly, then you see them start becoming the new film stars. Because I think it's not really sometimes it is the case where it's just like a really handsome face in front of a camera and that's about it. But sometimes when you listen to the interviews of some of these actors like Jake Gyllenhaal and all these other people, they really respect the craft, and there's a reason they are where they are, and they're so hardworking. And I think that goes even with big name directors. They're not just there because they got lucky into it. I think it's because they're so hardworking that those are the names that's still on top. And then there's those new names coming in, and when you listen to them, they sound like the younger versions of those guys who are just so hardworking. So I don't think it's a movie star thing of just fame. I think you do get some people where it is they are in a position just because they got lucky and they know like their family's an actor or something. But I think the stars who are at the top place now, like a majority of them are extremely hardworking and do respect the craft. And you do see new people now taking on that role and becoming, like when you notice someone's not humble and he's just relying on their looks, you see that they slowly also phase away and they start getting into these B-grade films and stuff like that. So I think the filter is there in terms of work and how hard you work, because if you're not, then you are going to fall by the wayside, I think. So I think who's on top deserves to be there.
I think from a sort of the other perspectives I've seen of like film stars, and obviously in the sort of fame surrounding it, and obviously I don't agree with like sort of the sort of paparazzi kind of culture of it, and that's a bit just let people be people. But I think we're also coming from a point of view of like, we really see the value and the experience and the craft and the hard work that goes into it. But I've seen so many opinions that I think are ridiculous about when a film star like says something, like has a point of view on a matter, right, that doesn't pertain to filmmaking. Then everyone in the comments and other people that I've known would be like, oh, why do we care about what they say? Why do we care about like, and it's like, because we're writing a piece about what they're saying. Like we're analyzing what they're saying in terms of the culture. Like, yes, they're in that place, and you got to understand that you got to think about, are they using their platform that for like pro-social values, or are their values terrible, and should we criticize those values? You know, I think it's very important to be able to like, for people in those positions to be able to have a platform and then use that, and they were able to look at that platform and say, are they doing good? Are they having like awful values? So it's like, that's why pieces are written about them and what they have to say.
So to answer the questions, are movie stars still important?
Yeah.
I think yes.
So another question on here is television the new cinema?
Well, I think that going into like the what started it? What series did they say started it off? It was The Sopranos, right?
Wasn't it? Oh, it could be. I was gonna say House of Cards, but that was just on Netflix.
Yeah, true. I think those two.
Sopranos
like
and
Breaking
also-
Bad.
And what's that one of the Wire as well?
Yeah, led us into the sort of, they say, the golden age of TV,
Yeah.
where people who don't experience a wide range of films and TV also say that, because it's like, if you only look at the mainstream films and then you only look at the mainstream television, the television started to get a lot better in terms of mainstream television versus mainstream film. But it's like, you're only looking at mainstream film, like look at other types of films from all around the world, and you won't say that it's the sort of the television is the best thing that's happening at the moment.
Yeah,
I think that, sorry, just my finish the second point to it is that you do look at what I think is happening with TV is that a lot of directors are going into a sort of longer form narrative, and I think that's when TV gets like really exciting, like with Barry Jenkins doing Underground Railroad.
I still need to watch them.
Does Netflix count as TV?
Yeah.
Or are we saying that TV is serialized, like episodic things? Or are we saying that the platform is TV?
I think
Because Netflix is making movies, but you watch them on your TV.
But Netflix movies are movies.
But it's
No,
still
no,
on your
I think-
TV.
I know,
I
but
think
Spielberg said that crap, didn't he? About
What is it?
he said that anything that's on a streaming platform, like regardless if it's TV or a film, is like a TV movie.
what I think that question doesn't mean like TV as in like broadcasting. I think it's actually talking about like series. Like I think it's talking about long forms stories. Yeah. So I think like because I think it's literally just talking about, because I mean, like you said, films are still films no matter what we broadcast. I think it is long, like series in general, like long form, is that with a new cinema, like not with a new, like where good stories are going, you know what I mean? And for me, I used to agree with it. I was just thinking of what Mark said, where it's like, okay, but if you only look at mainstream, then yes. But if, like you said, if you're looking at all the other kinds of films that's coming out, then no. But I do believe that there is a much bigger gate for filmmakers now with long form, and I think that's why you said so many of like filmmakers have migrated towards film, and I think for me as well, like I also like it makes me also want to tell stories now better, as long as it's like a contained story, like it's not this thing that goes on.
Here's the
and
thing,
on and on.
exactly. Like when that started, right? It was like, this is going to be a limited series. It's going to be basically a long movie that we're going to split up. But then these streaming sites or the TV stations or whatever were like, yeah, but it's not really profitable for us because now we're building up this whole audience and then we're just losing them because there's no second season. So now the thing is that you have to have a show that can be multiple seasons. You can't just really make, like, what is the last limited series that actually got a full release? I don't think there is one. Every, like Netflix I know has this thing where if you get a show, you have to make a second season within a year. It has to release a year after the first season came out. And
There's
it's
still limited series.
Yeah, there's quite a few limited.
what's the last one that came out?
Like
Normal People was one on.
Oh, but when was that?
I think usually limited series that don't have a second season are like based on a book. They kind of do that still.
Well, I'm
But
talking
I think
about
that's
like.
already inbuilt.
See, I'm talking about stuff like Big Little Lies, right? That was supposed to be a limited series, one season, then
Oh, yeah.
done. And then this, who was it? Hulu? No, HBO. I don't know. And then the studios were like, oh, but wait, people really like this. Let's make another season. Anyway,
No, but
there was a lot of drama on that set, and it's
They
like
had it, yeah.
there didn't need to be another season. It was made to be a limited series, but it's not that anymore.
I think you have a very good point with that. I think we're like, it's now how movie studios used to be when they wanted franchises and you just wanted to make. I think that's now the shift in with series and streaming and stuff. Because if you look at Breaking Bad, that was meant to just be there 5 seasons, and they made Better Call Saul. And if you look at
the movie.
yeah, and then if you look at Game of Thrones, it was meant to just be that like of the books. Now they're doing the prequels. And then if you look also at The Witcher that was meant to be on Netflix, that was also meant to be contained. Now they're also doing the prequels and the prequel movies. And so I think it is that thing where the mentality of franchising has now migrated from film into series, into the long form kind of thing, is where I think there is that thing where now they're trying to be that thing where they, like, even if it is a limited series, the studios will try and like juice off of it by trying to make something in the same universe or something along that, which I think sucks. But I think there are still there are still some limited series, but I think there are that thing where the people funding the shows are still like, okay, but can we maybe just set something aside, or can we do like maybe something set with the kids or something like that? So I think that shift has now changed because so much people are watching long form like it is the movies. I think that same franchising mentality has followed as well, because there was that period where it was just like limited, but now they're trying to do all these different spin-offs, you know?
I think that, but like Queen's Gambit was a limited series.
Oh, that's true.
Underground Railroad. But then I'm also just, which is why I was thinking about books, is that I'm thinking that limited series are more being made that are based on books, which are like sort of extended what would be film adaptations, but now they're allowed to sort of cover the entirety of the book.
No, but it's
but then and then it literally makes zero sense for them to make a sequel to that, you know, because it's like where the book definitively ends, but then, which is what I completely agree with you with Big Little Lies, which is also based on a book, and then they made another one. Why?
Yeah, and I think just on that point on limited series based on books, where like that's like the only avenue for it, where like they're like, okay, this is where the story ends. I also recently watched this thing, not recently, like I think it was in the holidays, like December holidays with my girlfriend, when there's also this book about, I think it was called Behind Her Eyes, where it was also this show where they couldn't continue on, and it was such a hectic cliffhanger, but I was so good about it, and because it was a book, that's why the show just ended. And I think it's a bit sad that they only do that when you like, or mainly do that when it comes to books. Like, I think they should also just trust the showrunners to be like, okay, this is where the narrative should end. But yeah, I think that's just my main.
Sorry, before we continue, what you just said reminded me of something that I thought was a really good idea. The Haunting of Hill House, right? That show on Netflix, that was supposed to be a limited series. And then Netflix was like, okay, let's do it season 2. Yeah. And then they were like, instead of trying to continue that story, which just wouldn't have worked, they were like, let's take the same actors. So it's the same people that we know, but let's put them in a totally new scenario, which was The Haunting of Bly Manor, which is, I just realized, the same thing that they've been doing in American Horror Story for a long time. So I think that's a good answer. I think that's a good middle in between. Like, if you're making a limited series, do something in the same world, but that's a completely different story.
Doesn't even have to be the same world. Like if you look at Black Mirror as well, each episode is its own allegory kind of tale. But when talking about Hill House, I don't know, for me, I was like, you should have just left it at season 1. Season 2 was so predictable, and even you keep sending like us messages of how much you just feel like American Horror Story should just like end, because sometimes...
True, but I'm watching American Horror Story in reverse because Netflix just started with season 10 and I didn't know. And then after season 10, it started with season 9 and then 8. So I'm just watching them backwards.
Yeah, he's watching the prequels.
Every new season is a prequel. But anyways, let's move on. Oh, actually, you know what, guys? I think this is taking quite a while. Yeah. So let's do this. We're going to stop this podcast here, and then we'll do a part 2 in 2 weeks from now. So we're going to continue talking now, but we'll release the video because otherwise it's just going to be too long. Yeah. So thank you so much for listening and watching. If you enjoyed this podcast, please smash the like button. And we started a little membership here on YouTube. So if you like what we're doing and you would like to support us and help us keep doing what we're doing, then please consider pressing the join button. It starts really cheap, it goes really expensive, but even if you don't want to do it, that's fine. Whatever.
It goes from really cheap to just a little less cheap.
Exactly.
So what are your answers to these questions? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Leave them down in the comment box below. We try and respond, and maybe we can start up a little debate there as well. And if you like this video, then smash that like button. One of those really helps us out. And right next to that like button is a subscribe button. It's this thing I've heard about that when you click it, then you see the other videos that person...
What?
Yeah, right?
What?
It's wild.
Revolution.
I think you guys should try it out.
And if you'd like to listen to the audio version of this podcast, catch us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever else you find or listen to podcasts. But until next time, go out there, stay safe,
And make your movie.